Right, you join me on the allotment for possibly the last one of 2020, definitely the last one before Christmas. And this is going to be a bit of a mixed video. It's a combination of a plot tour and also a review of what's happened on the growing season for 2020. I'll go along each bed, have a chat what's been in there, and also I'll possibly rate the crop, how it's done, say out of 10 or something, just to give you an idea of how satisfied I was with the crop. So, as usual, we start off with this. This is 6 tanks, and these are where I always grow my carrots. The majority of these, I think it was 5, was Swede candle, and I did one of Autumn King 2 or 3, and I must say they cropped very well. The only downside of this was there was one tank that I didn't actually thin out, and they produced decent carrots, but there was nothing of any size, and there was a lot thin compared to some. There's still a few left here, and the rain hasn't helped out. That's a little stump there, but plenty to go at. I did get a bit of carrot root fly in 1 or 2 tanks, not much, but next year I want to try and cover them all. The big thing what happened there was towards probably September we had some terrible rain where it rained and rained for days and days. I did manage to cover the tanks up, but before I got there these had took up an awful lot of water, and as a result some of the carrots actually split. They fetched the water up that quick, they split. So another lesson learned. I'm going to get a cover prepared next year, so if you have got prolonged rain coming in, I'll be putting it on. But all in all, happy. I'll give these an 8 out of 10. Now as I move along to this bed here, this here was where I had the garlic. I had the elephant garlic one end and conventional garlic the other. That garlic there was called Marco, and I must say I was very, very disappointed with that. Each one produced a bulb, but there was nothing of any size, although I was late putting them in. On the opposite hand, the elephant garlic produced some huge bulbs that did. I was a little bit late putting them in, but nevertheless, the elephant garlic come up good, and the Marco iffy. So, elephant garlic, I'll give that a 9. Conventional garlic, I'll give that a 6. But okay, what I did then when the garlic moved out, I manured this bed and I then planted some winter cabbages in. I've got some savoys in here, and I think there's some called Tundre and all, I'm not sure. I'll look it up and put it along the bottom of the screen. So that's the one bed of winter cabbages we've got. Let's move on to the next one. Now this bed here, you may recall, was where the majority was my flower bed. I did have a big wigwam up the top with the elders mix of the sweet peas. They flowered tremendously. And surrounding them, I had a mix of dahlias and also some cosmos. Again, both good value for money flowers. The cosmos was still in flower when I ripped them out about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and they were still going good. The big thing for me was when I built that TP out of the willow canes, and you remember when I fetched them out, they got some roots on. Not as bad as I thought actually, but I've cut them out now, chopped all the roots off, and I'm going to be using them again next year because it's a nice rustic feature. So for the flowers on here, sweet peas, cosmos and dahlias, I'm going to give them an 8. Now we come on to the veggie pod. It's looking a bit sparse in here at the moment because I'd got stuff planned to here. I've actually got some lettuce to actually put in here, but I haven't put anything in for a while. I've still got a bit of radish left in here. There's some beetroot and spring onions. Throughout the year, this has done far above expectation. Salad crops have just grown and grown and grown. It's got this little microclimate, and as you know, the self-wicking system underneath paid dividends. I've probably only watered this twice throughout the year. I have actually got a cover which fits over the top of here, and it acts like a little mini greenhouse, and I'll be putting that on once I put the lettuces in here, and hopefully that'll bring them on a bit quicker during the cooler days. So that's the veggie pod. Crops in here, it's got to be a 10. Moving on to the allium beds, the onions, it's a bit of a mixed story, success and failure. Most of it was my fault actually. I was late manuring the beds, and I put the manure on probably late February, early March, and by the time it come out to planting out time, it still hadn't rotted into the soil properly, and as a consequence some of the onions suffered. I don't know whether they got burnt or what, but they actually stood still for a good while. In fact, I thought some of them was going to rot, but they carried on. In this first bed here, there was a majority of it was the big onions. They had the Kelsey, Robinson's Mammoth, and I think there might have been one or two Elsa Craig. They performed really well, and I had a decent crop of them. In fact, they've stored well. Usually the big onions don't store too good, but in the shed there, I've probably got 15, 20 still there, and I've got one or two white rot just starting to appear, but I turf them out, but quite a lot of them still firm. In the middle bed, I'd had onion sets, and they didn't too good at all. The ones I did get was probably just tennis ball size, if that, might have been a bit smaller. And they got like a hardcore, although none of them actually run to seed. And then later on, I planted the leeks in there. Again, it was the compost I used, the seed just didn't germinate. Well, it germinated, but it didn't progress, as though there was no food in there. And luckily for me, DT Brown, the company who I use for my seeds, they got in touch and actually sent me some leek plants. I put them in, and them are doing quite well. Although it was late in the season, I reckon I'll be harvesting them around about March time, but it's something to look forward to. Down on the end of the bed there, I had shallots, the Golden Gourmet, and I've had a fantastic crop of those. We pickled, I think it's about 3 or 4 quite big jars, and we're just starting to eat them now. That was a great crop. So that was the shallots. So regarding the ratings, large onions, I'm going to give them probably a 7. The middle onions, which was the onion sets, I'll give them a 3. Them was very disappointing. The leeks, looking at us now, I'll probably give those a 7 again, and the shallots, I'll give those an 8. So that's the allium bed now. This one next year is destined to hold the containers of potatoes. So once most of the stuff's out here, I'll be actually manuring this again, ready to receive them. So let's move on to the next bed. This bed here is not too much of a happy sight at the moment. It's got about 4.5 tonne of cow manure underneath it, and I've covered them with a black plastic to help protect it from all the rain I'm having at the moment. But this will gradually get spread across the beds and into the compost bays as well. But during the year, these 3 beds here have housed the potatoes, and as you know, I grew potatoes all this year in containers, and I must say I've had a really good crop out of them. I'm very happy. The first earlies was in this bed here, and they was a variety called Swift. Lovely small salad potato, not need peeling, just rub the skins and then ready to go. And moving on to the second bed here in the centre here was my favourites, and them were the Charlottes. I had a really good crop of those. In fact, we've only just finished eating those. I think next year I'm going to get rid of the first earlies and grow 2 lots of Charlotte, because they do store quite well. And finally on the end bed there was where I grew the main crop potatoes, and then my usual ones there, and then with the Sao Palmyra. I've grew 12 containers, 30-litre containers, and we've just harvested the first one. Fantastic crop in there. You can fill down the container, the actual tubers inside are bulging, pushing the sides out. What I've done, I've actually moved them off the bed there and put them into the allium bed and put a cover over the top to keep the water off. And at the moment, we're just tipping a bucket out as and when we like it. That's the bonus of the containers. You can just empty them out. There's no digging, no spearing the potatoes, and it's just too easy for me. That's what I like about it. But also in between there, you may as well know, is I always grow my sunflowers in between the main crop potatoes with a good rich helping of manure on. The sunflowers are planted in, and that feeds them throughout the year. And as you probably know, it's my third successive year of winning the category in the largest sunflower hosted by Nick's Allotment Diary. So let's move on to the next bed. Moving on to this bed now, it's a bit of a mixed story again. This is where I grew my celery, and I didn't have very much success with that. Normal variety to grow is one called Latham Self-Blanching, but this year I think for some reason it was a different variety, and as a result I got poor results. In fact, it was nothing. Now these beds never dry out. There's tons and tons of manure dug in all these, and as a result it retains moisture very well. However, I did get a thing called celery blight on there, and before a matter of 3 or 4 weeks it started wilting from the top, and they went right the way down to almost a soggy mess, and as a consequence I got no crop off them at all. So celery, 0. That's gardening. Moving along here, I'm into the SWEDE, and again this is my usual variety called Tweed F1. For some reason at all, they put a lot of growth on, but there's no ball coming up at the end. Them like a long, thick stem, looks like a big moolie or radish, and no idea what's caused it. I've grown some more in the different area of the allotment, and they've produced a totally different crop. So all these have got big stems, but there's no actual ball at the end. I'm going to give these a 5. And the final crop in this bed is my favourites, the parsnips. This is again my usual traditional variety called Gladiator F1. I used to grow a variety called Tender and True, but that was susceptible, I found, for me anyway. I used to get canker around the tops. But since growing these, I've had no issue. I say I've had no issue. I've just spotted one with a bit of canker on the top, but we've had probably 4 or 5 out of here so far, and they're a decent size, the head diameters like that. But this year they're not as long as usual. Usually I can get them that long before you get the thin tapered stem, but this year they're probably only that. Nevertheless, still a good quality, nice tasting, and I'm going to give those a 7. So moving on along here, I've got to be careful because it's really slippery, the mud and that in there. And here again we've got about another ton and a half of well rotted cow manure, and I say that's going to be spread out over the beds a bit later. This bed here was where I grew my outdoor tomatoes, primarily Crimson Crush, but I did have a variety called Cocktail Crush as well, and both varieties outstanding quality. We did have a bit of blight on the site, but these nothing at all. In between them I did plant, there was 2 rows of radish. There was golden Burpee, and I think it was Choggia, I think is the other variety, and again both of them did well. In fact, it was the best crop of beetroot I've grown on this site since I've been on here. So all in all, the tomatoes 10 and the beetroot 10, so good. Let's move on again to this bed. Right, coming to this bed now. At the moment this has got winter vegging, winter cabbage, the Savoy in here, and I'm not sure what the other ones are. I know one of them is called Tundre, and seems to be doing okay, no pest damage, and I'm sure we'll get some decent crops out of them. But earlier on in the year, this part of the bed contained 3 rows of peas, and it was my usual variety called Hearst Green Shaft. Lovely long pods. You get anything up to 10 peas in a pod, usually 7 or 8 is an average size, but they did very well, and I had them grouped fairly together with a nice mesh surround. The problem arose when I took the cover off, because the following couple of nights we did have strong winds and it flattened the tops over, and they never really picked themselves up. although it didn't harm the crops, it didn't look too pleasing. So for the peas, I'm going to give I'll give those an 8. The other side of the peas, I had the salad. And I deliberately put the salad there because the height of the peas, that's south facing, and it didn't block any light off them. Salads, red and yellow, green lettuce, they just cropped and cropped. I did have a good successional sowing on there, and the other thing I grew on there was a spring onion called ramrod. Now these ramrod onions, they'll grow up as big as like a young mini leek. The stems on them are fantastic, and in fact I did transplant quite a few, move them from one place to another, and they just carried on growing. So that was ramrod. So for the salad crops, I'm going to give them a 9. One other crop I did have in here was I put a few plants of calabrese and all, and they give me 2 or 3 pickings, but not as good as the main bed, which we'll discuss next. And so we come to the last of the main beds, and these 3 here contained my brassicas. All the way along the row I put 4 plants of each of the 3 beds, so 12 in total sprouts. This variety is called Crispus, and it's fantastic. It's a club root resistant variety, and we're probably 2/3 of the way through pickings now. We've been picking about probably 6 weeks so far, and there's plenty enough here. We'll definitely be having some of these on our Christmas dinner. In this first bed here I grew Calabrese, and the variety was called Iron Man. Again, a great crop. This, just like the alum bed, I was a bit late manuring, and as a consequence the plants curled the toes up a little bit until they got settled down. It did set them back a little bit. What I planned on doing this year was doing successional sowing with the brassicas, but that didn't come to fruition quite well. Just recently, Steve from Seaside Allotment has put up his year review, and he had a fantastic crop regarding crop rotation and successional sowing. And I did double sowings of the calabrese, but they grew too quickly, and by the time they was ready to plant out, I just hadn't got the space in the bed ready, so I had to donate them to another plot holder. However, I did sow some more, which went where the cabbages are you've just seen, and they did reward me with some more crops. So in this first bed, I said, was calabrese. Down the bottom I've got celeriac, and they've done really well. We've picked probably 4, and there's still another 4 left. If you have never grown it before, well worth a try. It's got like a celery flavour and a lovely smell on it. And remember to remove the bottom leaves to get the air and light to it. So what do we do on the ratings on there? Sprouts, I'm going to give these an 8. I'm a bit thin at the tops. The sprouts are, although maybe over the next month they will develop. That's if there's still any left. Calabrese, I'm going to give that an 8 again, and the celeriac, I'm going to give it a 9. Just moving back into this middle bed now. This was where I had my cauliflowers, and most of these, I think they were my favourite variety called Clapton. Again, late developing because of the manure issue, but what crops they did produce was fairly good. I did have 1 or 2 the curds actually rot before they're actually big enough to pick, but all in all, for the cauliflower, I'm going to give those a 7. And finally, in the last bed there was where I had the cabbage. It was a mixture of Killerton, Greyhound, and there might have been another one. It was average. I did have a few rot in there as well. No idea why, because there's plenty of air circulation, plenty of light, and there was well spaced as well. So all in all, for those, cabbage I'm going to give 6. One more thing, let that triangle pass. One more thing in the bed now is where the cabbage were. I've actually planted my garlic for this year. It's just the conventional garlic, the Marcos, and I've got quite a few in here. So far it's 100% strike rate, them all up showing, and thumbs up. Hopefully that'll do well. Right, we come to the bean frame, and You may recall this was a bit of a lash up because I'd got plans to alter this around, but it was late in the season, so I just whacked the poles back in, some canes, and got planting again. The bed never really got prepared at all, so the plants just went more or less straight in as is. On this side, I had the traditional runner beans. My variety is called Benchmaster. They're a really good bean, lovely long straight pod. Produced really good crops. But on this side is a different story. It was the French beans. I grow two varieties. There's one called Cobra and one called Blue Lake. And none of them actually did anything to write home about. In fact, 2 or 3 of them actually rotted off into the ground. Signs of growth, but then straight the way down. What I did get off was acceptable, but again, partially my fault, the ground wasn't prepared. Hopefully it'll be a different story for the coming growing season because all these boards have rotted, so I'm going to be taking these up. I'm going to be rebuilding the bed using some decorative slabs that I've been given. I'll be laying those up on the side, so that'll be more or less the permanent bed. And hopefully fill it with cow manure and put more soil on the top, and that'll give them a better start for the next year. The bed in front of me, that's been a bit wasted this year. I just used it as a little bit of storage area. Plan is to build another coal frame in the next, I don't know, month, 2 months. I have got the wood all cut ready, so it's just a matter of fixing it. So regarding the beans, runner beans, I'm going to give these an 8, and the French beans, I'll give those a 4. Let's move into the greenhouse. Into the allotment greenhouse now. It's a bit of a, looks a bit of a bomb site at the moment. I've fetched everything out but left everything, all the pots still in here. In here it was predominantly tomatoes I grew, along the 4 along the back, 4 along the front, and they was mainly Crimson Crush. They did give a good crop, although I will say the ones I grew outside on the allotment beds, to me they do have a better taste, better flavour. I don't know whether it is because they're grown indoors or not, but still produced a heavy crop, but there's something about the flavour of the outdoor ones just topped it. So for the indoor tomatoes, I'm going to give that an 8. One other thing, indoor tomatoes, I did grow my favourite little cherry tomatoes, and them are the Sweet Million. They produce hundreds and hundreds of fruits. And right until I fetched the plant head, I was cutting off strands of tomatoes with 20 and 30. And they've flowered all through year. Main feed on these has been liquid comfrey and seems to have done the trick. So score for the cherry tomatoes, I'm going to give them a 10. Along the back here, I did have cucumber. And again, predominantly, they were my favourite little lunchbox one called Mini Munch. They only grow about 15 centimetres, 6 inches long, but fantastic flavour, lovely and crunchy, and they produce oodles and oodles of fruits. I did have one other plant called Telegraph, which is the conventional long cucumber. That did okay, but I find with cucumbers now, I prefer to pick one off and eat it more or less complete, not have it lying around in the fridge. Can't beat it fresh. One other final thing, in the front of the tomatoes here, I had a row of, it was a variation of peppers, capsicums, and also some chilies. They did produce some decent crops, but it was late in the season, and that was down to my fault. I was probably March, I think it was March, when I was actually sowing seed, which is way too late for them. I've got facilities now to give them earlier with lights and bottom meat. So I reckon that for this year, they'll be sown within the next couple of weeks. But all in all, the chilies and the peppers did quite well, so I'll give those a 7. So that's the greenhouse done. All that's left now. Oh, one other thing I forgot. Me grape boy. I nearly forgot that. This is the Black Hamburg. I just had to have a look on the label. It is called Black Hamburg, and this is the 3rd year of growing. I've got 2 rods growing along now, although I did cut one off by mistake. I thought it was a sucker and it was actually the main rod, but not to worry. It did produce, it's the best it's produced this year, and that was down to thinning out. and I was told about this, you must thin the grapes out. Not only the actual on the bunch itself, but actually remove bunches. And I removed, must have been 1.5, 2 mushroom crates, the blue crates, those actually topped up, and I thought, what have I done here? But did that pay off? They just got bigger and bigger, and towards the end of the year we picked quite a lot of grapes off here. So if you're growing grapes, you've got to have the art and thin them out, or you'll pay the price. So for the grapes, I'm going to give them an 8. Right now we're going to go outside and we'll have a look at the fruit trees. This here is the cherry tree. Not sure what the variety is, but every year this is under the threat of execution, of being evicted, because, to be honest, it's in the way. It's in the way of my compost bins, and it was already on here when I took the allotment over. But a bit of, I'm going to say, skillful pruning. It was more hatchet job, but it's rewarded me tremendously each year, and this year was no exception. We had bowls and bowls of cherries, more than we could actually handle. We give quite a lot away. So whether it's still here next year, I don't know. Knowing me, it will be. But for the cherries, I'm going to give it, it's got to be 10. Amongst all this ironwork here, which I've got plans for, this here is my Egremont russet, favourite apple of mine. And you probably recall earlier in the year I give this a right good hatcheting, but it did reward me. There's quite a few people said I've destroyed it and I've no fruit. Nah, it still produced good crops on here. In fact, no, there's nothing left now. It hasn't been long ago since I took the last apples off here. They do store well, and it is my favourite. That's more I can say about it. That's it. As far as score wise, I'm going to give it a 7. Although not a crop, I just want to give this a special mention. It's a coal frame. I think this is my 6th year on this plot, and never ever would I have thought I'd use a coal frame because I've got greenhouses, but this has proved its weight in gold. You may recall I had this off a fellow colleague who sadly passed away. It was a large one. I cut it in half, just fitted in the space, and it's paid dividends. It's I've not grown anything, but it's been ideal for hardening stuff off. Can't recommend these enough. So much so that I'm building another one for the other end of the allotment up there. So if you get a chance, I'd definitely recommend considering get a coal frame on your site. It's way for like a interdepartmental plant from coming out of the greenhouse into the bed. You can put it in there just to harden it off, and it does free up space in the greenhouse. Get the coal frame. This is the Williams pear tree, and again, I don't know whether it's me or whether in general it's been a good cropping year for fruit, but this is crop beyond doubt. The crop on here was that good, I had to put metal props underneath the branches because there was falling that low, there's a risk that it was going to snap off. So I bought some metal pals, made some wooden props, wedged them under there until the fruit was ready to pick. Again, we had tremendous crops off here. I did have a bit of disease in some, not sure what it was. I need to see one of our fruit experts, probably Woody could help me out on there. I did take some photographs, so I'll send some up to him. But this was a Williams pear tree, and definitely a 10 off this one again. So now we come to probably what is the lowest point of the growing season for me. We're at the strawberry bed. This variety is called Cambridge Favourite, and I did originally purchase these plants from a company called Pomona Fruits. Since putting these in, the bed was well prepared. They've just grown. In fact, most of them stay green throughout the winter. They don't actually die off, although a few of them are here. Right at the beginning of the season, I had a huge crop, flowers on here. There must have been between 150 and 200. And a couple of nights, we had some really cold nights, and I was devastated when I come to check the next morning. They'd got the deadly black eye, which more or less wipes the fruit out. I did get some fruits develop after that event, but the damage was done by then. What I do have planned for this year, if we have got any cold nights planned and the fruits are on, I've got some large sheets of bubble wrap which will go over the top and hopefully give it a few extra degrees of protection and carry them through. So this was, say, the low point for me, but that's gardening again. And so we come to the asparagus bed, or should I say what's left of it. If you watch the channel regularly, you may recall last year we had a visit from the mole on site, and he wreaked havoc in this bed. Had nothing at all, well, probably 1 or 2 spears come up. This year's done a bit better. I was in 2 minds whether to rip it out or whether to replant it, and I've done neither. I think I'm going to give it another chance. It's a bit too late now for putting asparagus spears in, or crowns in, for me anyway. But what I did do this year to supplement the gaps, I did put some more dahlias in and the odd sunflower, and all of them did really well. It's probably because it's well manured as well, and that's probably what's attracting the mole. He's still on the site, or members of his family, but fortunately not on my bed here. So I think for next year I'm going to give these another chance, because I do like asparagus. But performance this year is going to be a 3. Let's move on to the last fruit tree on the plot. And so we come to the last fruit tree on the plot, and this is the golden delicious apple tree. This has done really well. Don't know if you can see, there's still a few apples still left on there. I've left them on for the birds really, we've had all we want. This was another tree where I had a really good heavy pruning at the beginning of the season, and I think it's benefited because there's a lot of airflow in. I didn't have much trouble. In fact, I didn't grease band it this year, although I did get a few with codling moth on. There's still another one there, but ooh, you can see that's no good except for the birds. The blackbirds and the thrushes come and have a little peck, so I don't mind leaving these lying around. But all in all, I'm going to give this one a 7 again. So that's about wraps the tour up. Don't look too good here, the clouds are coming over. In fact, it's just starting to rain. So we'll just nip indoors and tie up the loose ends.
Well, it's nice to get back in the warmth after being out there. Bit of cold and rain, icy cold it is. You're in a bit of a time warp at the moment because the video, what's running on here, hopefully you've just watched it, just putting the editing together for the final touches. So I hope you enjoyed the season review. It's been a funny old year, both on and off the allotment. We've had things to attend to, and obviously YouTube took a back seat for a while, but hopefully in 2021 things will be returned back to more or less normal on the allotment. Whether that will happen worldwide, who knows. Many thanks for supporting the channel throughout not only last year but the previous years as well. I do appreciate it, and hopefully, as I say, we'll get more videos up in the coming months. So that's all left to me to say to you all is have a wonderful Christmas, stay safe wherever you are, and see ya in the next year. Bye for now.